The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the gray London clouds when a simple black car pulled up outside the Sunrise Community Kitchen. It was not the usual royal convoy that people expected to see when members of the British royal family made public appearances. There were no police motorcycles clearing the road ahead. There were no crowds of photographers waiting with their cameras ready. There was no red carpet rolled out on the sidewalk. Instead, there was just one ordinary-looking vehicle that could have belonged to anyone in the neighborhood. Sarah Williams was inside the community kitchen preparing for another busy day of serving breakfast to people who had nowhere else to go. She had been running this place for over 5 years and had seen many difficult mornings. The kitchen served hot meals to homeless individuals and families who were struggling to put food on the table. Sarah was used to greeting volunteers who came to help, but she was not prepared for what was about to happen on this particular Tuesday morning. The car doors opened and out stepped Prince William and Catherine, the Princess of Wales. They were not wearing their formal royal outfits that people usually saw them in during official ceremonies. William was dressed in a simple navy blue sweater and dark jeans. Catherine wore a casual cream-colored cardigan with comfortable black pants. They looked like any other couple who might be coming to volunteer at a local charity. Their bodyguard stayed back and tried to blend into the background as much as possible. Sarah nearly dropped the large pot of soup she was carrying when she saw who was walking through her front door. Her hands started shaking, and she quickly set the pot down on the nearest counter. She had received a phone call the day before from someone at Kensington Palace asking if the royal couple could visit, but she had thought it might be some kind of joke. Now here they were standing in her small community kitchen, looking around with genuine interest at the simple but clean space where she served meals every day. The other volunteers who were already in the kitchen preparing for the morning service stopped what they were doing and stared. Mrs. Peterson, who came in every Tuesday to help serve breakfast, had flour on her hands from making fresh bread. Tom, the retired teacher who helped wash dishes, was holding a wet plate and looking confused. Everyone seemed frozen in place, not knowing whether they should bow or curtsy, or just continue with their normal routine. Catherine was the first to break the silence. She walked directly over to Sarah with a warm smile and extended her hand for a simple handshake. Her voice was gentle and friendly as she introduced herself, even though everyone already knew exactly who she was. She asked Sarah to please treat them just like any other volunteers who had come to help. She said they were there to work and learn not to be treated like special guests who needed to be entertained. William followed his wife over to the small group of volunteers and began shaking hands with each person. He asked their names and thanked them for the work they were doing in the community. His manner was relaxed and natural, as if he had been coming to this kitchen for years. He looked around at the large pots and pans hanging from hooks on the walls and the long tables where people would soon be sitting down to eat their breakfast. The atmosphere in the kitchen began to change from nervous tension to curious excitement. Sarah found her voice again and began explaining how the kitchen operated. She showed them where the food was prepared and where people lined up to be served. She pointed out the dining area with its mismatched chairs and tables that had been donated by local businesses over the years. Catherine asked thoughtful questions about how many people they typically served each morning and what kinds of food were most needed. William wanted to know about the people who came for meals and whether they were mostly individuals or families. Both of them listened carefully to the answers and seemed genuinely interested in understanding how this small community kitchen worked to help people in need. As more volunteers arrived for the morning shift, they were surprised to find the future King and Queen of England already there and ready to begin working. The word quickly spread among the regular volunteers that this was going to be a very different kind of Tuesday morning at the Sunrise Community Kitchen. Catherine walked over to the pile of clean aprons hanging on hooks near the kitchen entrance. She selected a simple white apron with small blue flowers printed on it and tied it around her waist just like any other volunteer would do. The apron was clearly well used and had a few small stains from previous cooking sessions, but Catherine did not seem to mind at all. She smoothed it down over her cardigan and looked ready to begin working. William pushed up the sleeves of his navy sweater and asked Sarah where he should start helping. His voice was eager, and he seemed genuinely excited to get his hands dirty with real kitchen work. Sarah was still feeling nervous about having such important visitors in her small kitchen, but she could see that they truly wanted to be treated like regular volunteers. She took a deep breath and decided to give them actual tasks rather than just letting them pose for pictures. Sarah handed Catherine a large knife and pointed to a pile of fresh vegetables that needed to be chopped for the morning soup. There were carrots that needed to be diced and onions that needed to be sliced thin. Catherine picked up the knife and examined the vegetables with the concentration of someone who was taking the task seriously. She began cutting the carrots into small, even pieces while chatting with Mrs. Peterson, who was working beside her making sandwiches. William was directed to a huge pot of soup that needed constant stirring to prevent it from sticking to the bottom. He picked up the long wooden spoon and began moving it through the thick mixture of vegetables and broth. The steam from the hot soup made his face slightly red, and he had to push his hair back from his forehead. He looked completely focused on his job and seemed to be enjoying the simple physical work. The other volunteers began to relax as they watched the royal couple settle into their tasks. Tom, the retired teacher, started a conversation with William about the best way to keep soup from burning. He showed William how to stir in a figure-8 pattern and how to scrape the bottom of the pot gently. William listened carefully and followed the instructions like a student learning a new skill. Catherine discovered that cutting onions made her eyes water just like everyone else. She laughed as tears rolled down her cheeks, and she had to stop cutting to wipe her face with a paper towel. Mrs. Peterson offered her a tissue and shared the tip about keeping a piece of bread in your mouth while cutting onions to prevent crying. Catherine tried this method with the next onion and was delighted when it actually worked. As the morning progressed, the kitchen filled with wonderful smells of cooking food and the sound of people working together. William asked questions about cooking techniques and admitted that he usually burned his toast at home. The volunteers found this confession both funny and endearing. They began sharing their own cooking disasters, and soon everyone was laughing together like old friends. Catherine accidentally dropped a wooden spoon on the floor, and it made a loud clattering sound. She quickly picked it up and looked embarrassed about her clumsiness. Sarah assured her that everyone dropped things in the kitchen and handed her a clean spoon to continue her work. This small moment seemed to break down another barrier between the royal visitors and the regular volunteers. The kitchen atmosphere transformed from formal nervousness to comfortable teamwork. People were talking naturally about their families, their work, and their lives while they prepared food together. William and Catherine were asking genuine questions about the other volunteers and sharing stories about their own experiences. They were not just visiting the kitchen as royal duties, but were actually becoming part of the team that made breakfast possible for people in need every Tuesday morning. The breakfast service was about to begin, and people started gathering outside the community kitchen doors. Through the window, Catherine could see a line forming of individuals and families who were waiting for their morning meal. There were elderly people with walking sticks and young mothers carrying small children. Some people were alone, while others stood in small groups talking quietly together. Everyone looked tired but hopeful as they waited patiently for the doors to open. Sarah unlocked the front doors and welcomed the first group of people inside. The dining area quickly filled with the sound of chairs scraping against the floor and quiet conversations. William and Catherine moved from behind the serving counter, where they had been helping prepare food, to join the people who had come for breakfast. This surprised many of the guests who were not expecting to see members of the royal family sitting at the same tables where they were eating. At a corner table sat Margaret Thompson, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes. She was carefully eating her bowl of soup and seemed lost in her own thoughts. Catherine approached her table and asked politely if she could sit down. Margaret looked up with surprise, but nodded and gestured to the empty chair across from her. Catherine sat down and introduced herself simply as Kate, even though Margaret clearly recognized who she was. Margaret began telling Catherine about her life and how she had ended up needing help from the community kitchen. She explained that she had been married to her husband Robert for 45 years before he became very sick with cancer. The medical bills from his treatment had used up all of their savings and eventually forced them to lose their small house. Robert had died 6 months ago, and Margaret had been staying in different shelters ever since. Her voice was steady, but Catherine could see the sadness in her eyes as she shared her story. Catherine listened carefully to every word Margaret said. She did not interrupt or try to offer quick solutions to complex problems. Instead, she reached across the table and gently placed her hand over Margaret's weathered fingers. She asked thoughtful questions about Robert and what he had been like as a person. Margaret's face brightened as she talked about her late husband's love of gardening and his terrible jokes that had made her laugh for decades. Meanwhile, William had joined a table where a young father named James was sitting with his 2 small children. James looked tired and worried as he helped his daughter Emma cut up her pancakes while balancing his baby son on his lap. William asked if he could sit with them, and James nodded while trying to quiet the crying baby. William offered to hold the baby, and surprisingly, the infant stopped crying almost immediately when William picked him up. James explained to William that he had been living in his car with his children for the past 3 weeks. He had lost his job at a construction company when the project he was working on was canceled suddenly. Without steady income, he could not afford rent and had been turned away from several shelters because they were already full. He was spending his days looking for work while trying to take care of his children and keep them safe. William listened to James without judgment or pity in his voice. Instead of talking down to him, William treated James as an equal and asked about his work experience and skills. They discovered they both enjoyed watching football and had similar opinions about their favorite teams. William shared some of his own stories about the challenges of being a father and how difficult it could be to balance work responsibilities with family time. 8-year-old Emma was sitting quietly at the table next to her father James while he talked with William. She was holding a small stuffed rabbit that looked like it had been her companion for many years. The rabbit was missing one button eye, and its fur was worn smooth from being hugged countless times. Emma kept the toy close to her chest as she ate her breakfast with one hand and listened to the adult conversation around her. Emma had been staying at different shelters with her mother and father after they had to leave their apartment. Her mother, Sarah, had been hurt by Emma's stepfather, and they had to run away in the middle of the night to stay safe. The little girl did not fully understand all the complicated adult problems, but she knew that her family was going through a very difficult time. She had learned to be quiet and not cause any trouble because the grown-ups already had enough to worry about. Catherine was still talking with Margaret at the nearby table when she noticed Emma watching her with curious eyes. The little girl seemed fascinated by Catherine's long brown hair and the way she spoke so gently with the elderly woman. Emma had been taught to be polite to adults, but she was naturally shy around strangers, especially when she did not know if they were safe people to trust. As Emma was reaching for her cup of orange juice, her small hand accidentally knocked it over. The plastic cup tumbled across the table and juice spilled everywhere, including onto Catherine's cream-colored cardigan. The orange liquid made a large wet stain on the front of her sweater and dripped onto her lap. Emma's eyes filled with tears immediately as she realized what she had done. The little girl began crying and saying she was sorry over and over again. She had learned from past experiences with her stepfather that spilling things or making messes could lead to angry shouting or worse punishments. Emma cowered in her chair, expecting to be scolded harshly for her accident. Her father, James, quickly grabbed napkins and started trying to clean up the mess while apologizing to Catherine for his daughter's clumsiness. Instead of being upset or annoyed, Catherine immediately stood up and walked over to Emma's chair. She knelt down so that she was at the same eye level as the frightened child. Her voice was soft and reassuring as she told Emma that accidents happen to everyone and that there was nothing to be worried about. Catherine reached out and gently wiped the tears from Emma's cheeks with her own hands. William had been watching the scene unfold, and he quickly pulled out a clean white handkerchief from his pocket. But instead of just handing it over to clean up the spill, he decided to turn the situation into something fun for Emma. He pretended that the handkerchief was a magic cloth that could make messes disappear. He waved it dramatically over the table while making silly sound effects that made Emma giggle despite her tears. Catherine joined in with William's game and pretended to be amazed by the magic handkerchief's powers. She asked Emma if she wanted to help make the orange juice disappear completely. The little girl nodded eagerly, and Catherine guided her small hand to help wipe the table clean. Together, they made the mess vanish while Emma laughed at their silly performance. When they finished cleaning up, Emma looked up at Catherine with wonder in her eyes. She asked in a small voice if she could give the nice lady a hug to say thank you for not being angry about the spilled juice. Catherine's heart melted at the innocent request, and she opened her arms wide. Emma rushed into the embrace, and Catherine held her tightly, while whispering that she was a very good girl and that her parents should be proud of her. The moment was so genuine and touching that other people in the dining room stopped their conversations to watch. They could see that this was not a staged photo opportunity, but a real connection between a caring adult and a child who needed kindness. The official part of the royal visit was supposed to end at 11 o'clock in the morning. The original plan had been for William and Catherine to spend 2 hours at the community kitchen serving breakfast and meeting some of the people who used the facility. Their security team was already preparing for their departure and checking that the route back to their car was clear of any crowds that might have gathered outside. However, when 11 o'clock arrived, William and Catherine showed no signs of wanting to leave. They were still deeply engaged in conversations with the people they had met during breakfast service. Catherine was writing something down on a piece of paper while talking quietly with Margaret about housing resources that might be available for elderly people in her situation. William was bouncing James's baby son on his knee while discussing job opportunities in the construction industry. Sarah, the kitchen manager, approached them hesitantly to let them know that their scheduled time was up. She did not want to rush such important visitors, but she also knew that royal schedules were usually planned down to the minute. Catherine looked up from her conversation with Margaret and asked if it would be possible for them to stay a bit longer. She explained that there were still people she wanted to talk with and tasks in the kitchen that needed to be finished. The security team exchanged glances and spoke quietly into their communication devices. This was not part of the planned schedule, but they could see that the royal couple genuinely wanted to extend their visit. After a brief discussion, they agreed that William and Catherine could remain at the community kitchen for as long as they wished. The important thing was keeping them safe, not sticking to a rigid timetable. William and Catherine rolled up their sleeves once again and returned to the kitchen to help with the cleanup process. They insisted on washing the large pots and pans that had been used to prepare breakfast for over 60 people. Catherine stood at the industrial sink scrubbing stubborn food residue, while William dried the clean dishes and stacked them carefully on the shelves. The regular volunteers were amazed to see members of the royal family elbow-deep in dishwater doing the same unglamorous tasks that they did every week. Mrs. Peterson commented that she had never expected to see a future queen washing soup pots with the same enthusiasm that she brought to more formal royal duties. Tom, the retired teacher, joked that William was becoming quite skilled at dish drying and might have a backup career if the royal business did not work out. While they worked, Catherine continued her conversation with Margaret and learned more details about her housing situation. Margaret explained that she had been on waiting lists for affordable senior housing for months, but nothing had become available. Catherine asked for Margaret's phone number and promised to help connect her with some resources that might be able to assist her more quickly. William gave James his personal business card, but not in the way that most people would expect. He did not present it as a royal favor or special privilege. Instead, he explained that he knew some people in the construction industry who were always looking for skilled workers. He asked James about his specific experience and qualifications, then suggested some companies that might be good matches for his background. As they packed leftover food into containers for people to take home, Catherine and William continued making personal connections with individuals they had met. They exchanged contact information with several people and made specific promises about follow-up help. These were not vague offers of assistance, but concrete commitments to connect people with resources and opportunities. The afternoon sun was streaming through the kitchen windows by the time William and Catherine finally prepared to leave. They had spent over 5 hours at the community kitchen, far longer than anyone had expected. They thanked each volunteer personally and promised to return soon to help again. Their genuine warmth and commitment had transformed what could have been a brief royal photo opportunity into meaningful relationships with real people facing real challenges. Word about what had happened at the Sunrise Community Kitchen began spreading through the neighborhood even before William and Catherine had driven away. Mrs. Peterson called her daughter as soon as she got home and described how the royal couple had washed dishes and packed leftovers, just like regular volunteers. Tom, the retired teacher, stopped by the local pub on his way home and told his friends about watching Prince William learn to stir soup properly and laugh at his own cooking mistakes. The story that emerged from these conversations was not about meeting famous people or witnessing a royal photo opportunity. Instead, the volunteers talked about encountering two genuinely caring individuals who had treated everyone with respect and kindness. They described how Catherine had knelt down to comfort a crying child, and how William had held a fussy baby while talking with its worried father about finding work. Sarah, the kitchen manager, received dozens of phone calls throughout the rest of the week from local newspapers and television stations wanting to know about the royal visit. But when reporters asked her about meeting celebrities, she corrected them and explained that what had impressed her most was meeting two people who clearly understood the importance of serving others. She described how they had insisted on doing real work rather than just posing for pictures. The local community newspaper published a front-page story about the visit, but the headline focused on the human connection rather than the royal status. It read, "Royal couple shows true service at local kitchen," and included quotes from volunteers about the genuine care and attention that William and Catherine had shown to everyone they met. The article mentioned specific examples of their kindness, like Catherine's patient conversation with Margaret and William's natural way of connecting with James and his children. Social media posts about the visit began appearing from people who had been at the kitchen that morning. Emma's mother posted a photo of her daughter hugging her stuffed rabbit and wrote about how a kind woman had turned her child's accident into a moment of joy and learning. She did not mention that the kind woman happened to be the Princess of Wales, because that seemed less important than the genuine care she had shown. The ripple effects of the visit extended far beyond just social media posts and newspaper articles. The Sunrise Community Kitchen received over 40 phone calls from people wanting to volunteer their time to help serve meals and support the community. Many of these new volunteers said they had heard about the royal visit and were inspired by the example of service they had witnessed. Local businesses began reaching out to offer donations of food and supplies. A nearby grocery store called to ask if they could provide fresh vegetables and bread on a regular basis. A restaurant owner offered to donate leftover meals at the end of each day rather than throwing them away. These business owners explained that hearing about William and Catherine's hands-on involvement had motivated them to find ways to help their community. The story reached other community kitchens and food banks throughout London. Managers from similar organizations called Sarah to ask for advice about starting their own volunteer programs and building connections with people who needed help. They wanted to learn from the model they had heard about, where volunteers and guests work together as equals rather than maintaining distance between helpers and those being helped. 3 other community centers in the area reported increases in volunteer applications and donations in the weeks following the royal visit. People who had never considered volunteering before were calling to ask how they could get involved in helping their neighbors. They said that hearing about the royal couple's genuine engagement had made them realize that everyone could make a difference through simple acts of service. The most significant ripple effect was among the people who had been served breakfast that morning. Margaret told other residents at her temporary shelter about the conversation she had with Catherine and how respected she had felt during their time together. James shared with other job seekers about his discussion with William and how the prince had treated him as an equal rather than someone to be pitied. These stories spread hope throughout the community that there were people who cared about their struggles and wanted to help in meaningful ways. 3 weeks after the visit to the community kitchen, Margaret Thompson was sitting in her small room at the shelter when she received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end introduced herself as Linda from the Golden Years Housing Trust, a charity that helped elderly people find affordable places to live. Linda explained that she had received Margaret's information from someone who thought she might qualify for their housing program and wanted to set up a meeting to discuss her options. Margaret was confused at first because she did not remember applying to the Golden Years Housing Trust. Linda explained that sometimes people referred individuals who might benefit from their services. Margaret realized that this phone call was probably connected to her conversation with Catherine at the community kitchen. She had mentioned her housing situation, and Catherine had written down some notes while they talked. The meeting with Linda took place the following Tuesday at a small office near the community center. Margaret brought all of her paperwork, including documents about her late husband's medical expenses and the loss of their home. Linda reviewed everything carefully and explained that Margaret qualified for their emergency housing program for seniors who had become homeless due to medical debt or other unexpected financial hardships. Within 2 weeks, Linda had found Margaret a small one-bedroom apartment in a building specifically designed for elderly residents. The rent was based on her limited income from Social Security, and she would have access to support services like meal delivery and transportation to medical appointments. Margaret cried when she saw the apartment with its small kitchen and sitting area that would be entirely her own space after months of sleeping in shelters. Meanwhile, James had been carrying William's business card in his wallet and wondering if he should actually use the contact information. He was hesitant to reach out because he did not want to seem like he was taking advantage of a brief meeting with someone famous. However, after another week of unsuccessful job searching, he decided to call the number that William had written on the back of the card. The phone number connected James to a construction company foreman named Mike, who explained that Prince William had called him personally to recommend James for any available positions. Mike was impressed that William had taken the time to make the call and had spoken specifically about James's experience and work ethic. He invited James to come in for an interview the next day. The interview went well, and Mike offered James a position on a crew that was building affordable housing units across London. The job came with steady hours, good pay, and the possibility of overtime work when projects had tight deadlines. James was able to move his children out of his car and into a small apartment within his first month of working. He sent a thank you note to William expressing his gratitude for the connection and the chance to rebuild his family's stability. Emma's mother received a phone call from a social worker named Patricia, who specialized in helping families who had experienced domestic violence. Patricia explained that she had been asked to reach out by someone who was concerned about their situation and wanted to make sure they had access to all available resources and support services. Patricia helped Emma's family connect with a legal aid clinic that could assist with divorce proceedings and restraining orders. She also introduced them to a support group for mothers and children who had experienced domestic abuse. The group met weekly at a community center and provided both practical assistance and emotional support from other families who understood their situation. Most importantly, Patricia helped Emma's mother find safe, permanent housing through a program specifically designed for domestic violence survivors. The apartment was in a secure building with on-site support staff and resources for children who had been traumatized by witnessing violence. Emma was able to start attending a regular school for the first time in months and began seeing a counselor who specialized in helping children process difficult experiences. None of these follow-up actions were publicized or mentioned in any news stories about the royal visit. William and Catherine had made their calls and connections quietly without seeking any recognition for their efforts. They had treated their promises as genuine commitments rather than polite gestures that would be forgotten after the cameras stopped rolling. The people who benefited from this follow-through understood that they had encountered something rare in their interactions with William and Catherine. They had met two individuals who possessed both the resources to help and the character to follow through on their word. The way William and Catherine had conducted themselves at the Sunrise Community Kitchen represented a completely different approach to royal duties than what many people expected from members of the British royal family. Traditional royal visits often involved formal ceremonies with carefully planned speeches and photo opportunities that maintained a respectful distance between the royals and the public. This visit had broken down those barriers in ways that surprised everyone who witnessed it. Their leadership style was based on service rather than authority. Instead of arriving to be served and honored, they had come to work alongside volunteers and serve people who needed help. They had not expected special treatment or demanded that others adjust their routines to accommodate royal protocol. Rather, they had adapted themselves to the existing culture and rhythm of the community kitchen. William and Catherine had demonstrated that true leadership often means being willing to do the jobs that others might consider beneath their status. They had washed dishes, scrubbed pots, and cleaned up spills without any sense that these tasks were inappropriate for people of their position. Their willingness to perform humble work had earned them more respect than any formal ceremony could have achieved. They had also shown remarkable skill in connecting with people from very different backgrounds and life experiences. Catherine's conversation with Margaret had bridged the gap between someone who had lived a life of privilege and someone who was facing homelessness in her elderly years. William's interaction with James had created a genuine friendship between a future king and an unemployed construction worker who was living in his car with his children. Their approach to listening had been particularly impressive to the volunteers and guests at the community kitchen. Instead of asking superficial questions designed to move conversations along quickly, they had asked thoughtful follow-up questions that showed they were genuinely interested in understanding each person's situation. They had given people their full attention rather than scanning the room for the next person they needed to meet. The royal couple had also demonstrated emotional intelligence in their interactions with people who were going through difficult times. They had not offered empty sympathy or meaningless platitudes about everything working out for the best. Instead, they had acknowledged the real challenges that people were facing while offering concrete help and maintaining hope for better circumstances. Their treatment of Emma after she spilled juice had shown particularly good judgment about how to interact with children who might be dealing with trauma. Instead of brushing off the incident or making a big show of forgiveness, they had recognized that the child needed reassurance and had found a way to turn an embarrassing moment into something fun and memorable. Perhaps most importantly, William and Catherine had followed through on their commitments after the visit ended. They had treated their conversations as the beginning of relationships rather than brief encounters that would be forgotten once they returned to their royal duties. Their willingness to make phone calls and use their connections to actually help people showed that their concern was genuine rather than performative. This approach to leadership had implications that extended far beyond one visit to a community kitchen. It suggested a vision of what the monarchy could become in the 21st century if it focused on service to others rather than maintaining traditions for their own sake. William and Catherine were showing that royal privilege could be used as a tool for helping people rather than just a symbol of social hierarchy. Their example had inspired other people to think differently about their own leadership roles, whether in their families, workplaces, or communities. The volunteers at the kitchen had seen that real authority comes from treating others with dignity and respect, rather than demanding deference based on titles or positions. The ripple effects of their leadership style were already visible in the increased volunteer participation and donations that the community kitchen had received. People wanted to be part of an organization that had been recognized not for its efficiency or size, but for its commitment to treating everyone as valuable human beings deserving of care and respect. 6 months after that memorable Tuesday morning at the Sunrise Community Kitchen, the effects of William and Catherine's visit were still being felt throughout the local community and far beyond. The story of their genuine engagement with people in need had become a defining moment that changed how many people viewed the younger generation of the British royal family. It had shown that they understood their roles not as ceremonial figureheads, but as public servants with real responsibilities to help others. Margaret Thompson was now settled in her small apartment and had become a volunteer at the same community kitchen, where she had once been served meals. She helped other elderly people navigate the complicated process of finding housing and social services. Margaret often told new volunteers about her conversation with Catherine and how it had given her hope during the darkest period of her life. She emphasized that the princess had listened to her story without judgment and had followed through on her promise to help. James was thriving in his construction job, and had been promoted to a supervisory position after demonstrating strong leadership skills and reliability. He had moved his family into a larger apartment, and his children were doing well in school. James kept William's business card framed on his bedroom dresser as a reminder that sometimes help comes from unexpected sources. He had started a small fund at his workplace to help other employees who were facing temporary financial hardships. Emma was now 9 years old and doing well in school despite the difficult experiences she had faced earlier in her life. She still carried her worn stuffed rabbit, but she also had new confidence and joy that came from living in a safe, stable home. Emma's mother had completed a job training program and was working as a medical assistant at a local clinic. The family had found healing through counseling and support from other survivors of domestic violence. The Sunrise Community Kitchen had become a model for other similar organizations throughout London and beyond. Sarah, the manager, had been invited to speak at conferences about creating inclusive environments where volunteers and guests work together as equals. The kitchen now served over 100 people each morning and had expanded to offer job training programs and housing assistance in addition to meals. The volunteer program at the kitchen had grown from 12 regular helpers to over 60 people who rotated through different shifts during the week. Many of these new volunteers said they had been inspired by the example of service they had heard about from William and Catherine's visit. They wanted to be part of an organization that treated everyone with dignity and created real connections between people from different backgrounds. Other members of the royal family had taken notice of the positive response to William and Catherine's approach to public service. Several other royals had begun incorporating more hands-on volunteer work into their official duties and spending more time in direct conversation with the people they were supposed to serve. The traditional model of formal royal visits was slowly being replaced by more genuine engagement with real community needs. The story of the visit had also influenced public expectations about what leadership should look like in the modern world. People began expecting their elected officials and community leaders to demonstrate the same willingness to do difficult work and make personal connections with constituents. The idea that true authority comes from service rather than power had gained traction in political discussions and civic organizations. William and Catherine had returned to the Sunrise Community Kitchen several times since their first visit, always arriving quietly and working alongside the regular volunteers. They had brought their children on one occasion to help pack meals and learn about the importance of helping others. These follow-up visits had reinforced the message that their initial engagement had been genuine, rather than a one-time publicity gesture. The lasting impact of that Tuesday morning was not measured in newspaper headlines or television coverage, but in the changed lives of individuals who had been treated with unexpected kindness and respect. Margaret had stable housing, James had steady work, and Emma had a safe home because two people with extraordinary privilege had chosen to use their resources and influence to help others in concrete, practical ways. The royal couple had proven that titles and positions matter less than character and actions. They had shown that being truly royal means being willing to get your hands dirty, your heart involved, and your time committed to serving people who need help the most.